Tropes exist in all stories. I was just thinking in the mentor trope, right?
Mm-hmm.
The tropey character of Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars, the mentor. But that's also Mr. Miyagi in Karate Kid. He's also a mentor.
Mm-hmm.
So one of those is sort of like action comedy martial arts, and the other one is space opera, fantasy, sci-fi.
Except for hello, writers and crafters. I'm Valerie Isan.
And I'm Erick Mertz.
And this is episode 158 of the podcast. It's June 5th, 2024, as we record this. Today, we're talking about story starters and tropes and not getting stuck at the beginning of your writing process and all those juicy bits. First, we want to thank our existing patrons for believing in our work here and offline. Become a patron of the arts at patreon.com/Valerie Isan and patreon.com/Strange Air Stories. Announcements. My exploring imagery in creative nonfiction class is going swimmingly. It's halfway done, so it'll be too late to sign up now, but I think it's a rad class. This is kind of part of my author update, I suppose. I'm really enjoying teaching it. I've got lots of ideas about how to break it up into, smaller bits so I can reuse the content. You can go to wordcrafters.org to get information on other classes that Wordcrafters does. A lot of them are virtual, so it'd be cool, even if you're not local, to check them out. We've got the 2024 Writercraft Writing Retreat and Workshop. Registration is happening live right now. We've got just a few tickets left, and the event is August 22nd through the 25th. All the lodging is included, all the food's included. There's 4 workshops, an open mic, an analysis for scene circle. It's just loaded full of yummy, awesome stuff. And it's on the Mackenzie River and it's beautiful. And I really think you should go. So go to
Nobody
Valerie.
hates the Mackenzie River. Nobody hates the
Nobody hates Mackenzie River.
Ever.
And it is valerieisan.com/retreat for more information on that. Why don't you talk about your horror?
I've got a couple of announcements.
Yeah, bring it.
We've just closed submissions for Caretaker Press for Back Into the Ground, and we closed them because we reached about 110 submissions. And when you're at 110 submissions and you've read 20, it's maybe time to pause. So I've solicited some submissions from people, from agents that I know, and I've got a few irons out in the fire for other authors that I want in the anthology. So we're at that stage. But so if you had a story in mind, I apologize. We had to close. We will be reopening for future anthologies, or perhaps later when we kind of figure out what we have. I am also teaching at the Garden Home Library Writers Group on the 25th. It's at 6:30. It's going to be a virtual and in-person event. Garden Home Libraries are in the Beaverton area of the Portland metro area, and I'll be teaching self-publishing success. This is just a really brief overview that I do of self-publishing fundamentals, like what you need to know about things like covers and editors and things like that. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Can you tell me again the name of the group? Garden Home Library?
It's the Garden Home Library Writers Series. Let me get that specifically for you. And they're just, there's a lot of these groups, a lot of groups that do Garden Home Community Library. So I think I've talked about this before. Like local libraries often have either a writers group or a critique group, or they do programming, educational programming around specific areas. Like I know in Oregon City, there's always local history and, self-care and wellness, and there's a writers creative groups and stuff like that. So a lot of local libraries offer some, free or very, very affordable options for getting some education. So I'll be at the Garden Home Community Library, gardenhomelibrary.org. is where you can find them if you're in the Portland metro area. And yeah, I'll be teaching a self-publishing fundamentals class at 6:30 on the 25th.
Awesome. That sounds exciting. I'll put a
Yeah,
link in the show
these
notes.
are fun things that we do. These are
Yeah.
fun things that we do.
My focus and finish goal setting and strategic planning for writers book is the first in a series. It is an ebook only at this point. You can get it free on my website or any ebook retailer that you prefer. So you can go check out that as well. Okay, I think that's,
Can we plug books on this show, Val? Can we plug
yeah,
books?
of course we can plug
Yeah.
books. It's part of
All
our
right.
reading
Well,
series, right?
I'm just, well, I was just going to say, like, book one, Black Springs Saga, out. It's on Amazon. It's 99 cents. I'm actually finishing second draft of the third book in that series right now. So I'm going to be doing the pre-order for the next book, and probably have the pre-order for the third book sometime this summer. Actually, all that's going to be coming really fast. So get the series starter. It's kind of a prequel that kind of sets the story, kind of sets the setting, so to speak. I didn't want to say set the setting. That sounded a little redundant, but I guess it's valid.
The
It sets
alliteration's
the
nice.
setting. Yeah, thank you. And it's 99 cents. What are you going to do? Like, you're out 99 cents if you don't like it. But I promise you, if you read it and give it a chance, that it's got a good chance of you have a good chance of enjoying it.
Nice. Well, I've read it and I enjoyed it. So there.
That's thanks. See, I'm blushing. That gives me a blush.
YouTube blush.
If you're listening, folks, I'm blushing. What are you reading?
What am I reading? Right now I'm reading Crow Talk by Eileen Garvin. And
Sweet.
again, like, I went to the bookstore yesterday to pick up Shift, and I see brand new hardcover Crow Talk, Eileen Garvin on the new release table. And I'm like, I'm reading that right now, but it's an arc that I got like months and months and months and months ago. And I'm just now reading it. And that seems to be the way it goes. I get an arc, I'm reading it after publication. So yeah,
I won one of those, like, I won one of those on Goodreads. Like, I got the print book. You know, they do the giveaways, and it has been on my nightstand. I've moved, and it moved on my nightstand. Like, it's moved from one house to another. Over a year, I've had the same book. It's an arc, and now I just feel guilty. Like, it just makes me feel guilty to look at it. So,
well, the way I think about reading arcs out of I mean, the whole purpose of the arc, obviously, it's an advanced reading copy. So you're reading it before publication, either for the purposes of getting it in your bookstore, having it be a staff pick, putting up a review, you know, right on the day of publication, something like that. That's the reason why arcs are there. And also, you know, as a proof copy to see if there's any, you know, mistakes or something like that you can fix easily before the actual publication day. But I think
so when you take the advanced part out of it, out, suddenly it just becomes like a reader copy.
Yes, but I still think that there's a lot of value in that, because the same reasons why you would want someone to read your book are the same reasons you would want someone to read your advanced reading copy. So even if you don't read it in advance, you know, you're still going to get a review out of it. Hopefully you're still going to get, you know, another body that has read the book and can recommend it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It doesn't matter when they do it.
Yeah.
And as self-published authors, well, as any author, really, I mean, people are always discovering us. You know, you can have, I think that's the beauty of being like a mid-list author. You're not like famous. Maybe nobody knows your name, but enough people buy your books that you're making a good living at it. And I think that people discovering us at any stage and then going back and reading our backlist is kind of the bread and butter. And that will always keep book sales coming through, trickling through.
This started as a joke, and now you've taken it to like a sweet place. So I'll just follow your sweet place and say, like, the whole joy of like being a reader and a writer is discovering, right? Like, we all just want to discover. I want to discover cool things, and I want to be discovered. So like, any point in the continuum where I'm either discovering or being discovered is so gratifying. So gratifying.
So don't feel guilty about that. Old
Guilt is
arc
gone.
on
It's
your
amazing.
a book side table.
Look at
Book
that.
side table. That's what we should start calling it. The book side table.
That is about what it is. That's what it is at this point.
What are you reading?
I've been languishing with reading. There's some not do not finishes that I've added to my list, and I couldn't get through a couple of things in the last couple of weeks. But I picked up a book called The Manitou, which is a kind of a classic, kind of old horror book, by Graham Masterson. It kind of always falls into the like, kind of 50s, 60s, 70s classic horror stuff. And so I picked that up.
What's it called again?
Like I've been picking, it's called The Manitou. It's Manitou. Um,
Okay.
and it's creepy. It's very like creepy, and it's one of those books. I've been doing this a lot where there'll be two books, and I'll say I want to read that one. I know I'm gonna like that one, and I grab the I want to read one, or I want to like that one. You ever do that where you say like I want to like this, so I'm gonna read this, versus like I know I'm gonna like this. I'm gonna spend the next couple of weeks grabbing the I know I'm gonna like this book, because yeah, when you don't not finishing books can be demoralizing for me. So
All right. Well, let's get started on our main topic. We wanted to talk about tropes and story starters and understanding how they fit into our writing process and why they're useful. So let's get started on that. Why don't you take the lead?
yeah. Well, I was, when thinking about topics and things of value to that we could talk about, um, it was there's always this conversation about with writers about uh getting stuck, right? Like writer's block. It's a common conversation. Actually, yesterday I was in a writer's group, and they were talking about, having the conversation about writer's block and how to get out of it. And, that got my mind going on the idea of like, there's a lot of tools that we have as writers to not just get out of writer's block, but I think to avoid or to prevent encountering it. And one of the things I think that for me that works is understanding the story trope that you're working in, right? So story tropes are like, I don't want to say like they're common storytelling devices, but I mean that's really kind of the best example, right? If you think about a story trope like The Chosen One, right? The Chosen One would cover things like Harry Potter. It covers Star Wars. It's the Hunger Games. It's like
Even The Hobbit,
in that
really.
The Hobbit, right? I mean, you can go through a lot of fantasy, a lot of science fiction, a lot of genre. The Matrix, right? Like a seemingly ordinary character is destined to save the world or accomplish a great task. The trope is familiar, and you know it. Your fellow authors know it, but most importantly, your readers know it. And I think there's this resistance to, well, at least from new authors, I think there's this resistance to embracing tropes because they feel like they're cheating, right? Like, well, if this, what's the point of another story about the chosen one or another love triangle or another mysterious stranger story? Like, these are all, and there's value in asking that question. Like, what is the, like, why do
How
we
can
need
I
another
make
one?
this different? Yeah.
Well, there you go. That's your challenge as an author. Like, your job is to take the familiar, the chosen one story, the love triangle story. I mean, if we remove love triangle stories, how many romance novels would there be? There'd be like six, you know, maybe five and a half. And so I think that I think that in order to not get stuck, or a way to get moving if you are feeling yourself slowing down and getting stuck, is understanding the trope that you're working with,
Mhm.
that you're actually embracing, because in that trope there becomes a lot of familiar beats, a lot of familiar story moments, and those help you when you're stuck. What does my character do here? He's gotten the magic item, but what, or she's gotten you know, she's met the she's taken her boyfriend to the cafe and met the man of her dreams behind the counter. Like you
Mm-hmm.
encounter those moments that are that you don't know what to do with. Like to understand that you're working with and drawing from a kind of rich fountain of like of that exists in your trope is can be valuable in moving your character and you on.
I think so too. And I think that there's a lot of fun actually in if you're using a trope to get started, that gets you
Yeah.
over like that, what do I write about that blinking cursor, that blank page? And then once you're in the trope, then you get to like play in the sandbox and you're like, okay, so yeah, the meet the guy behind the, in the cafe, but is that the story or is that like, I mean, I remember watching a TV show where that happens. She's sort of like she's married, she's newly married, she's totally in love with her husband, but they're like opposites, and the opposites
Right.
attract. That's another trope.
There's another one.
There's another trope, and she does go to a cafe and meets like her twin, basically, like they would have been just amazingly perfect for each other. And you can see the
Right.
sparks flaring. And the new husband is like, uh-oh, like, oh, where does
Right.
that put me?
Right.
And she's like, no, you are the man of my dreams. Like, you are the one that I'm meant to be with. I'm totally there with you. But so it's like, oh, there's the trope, there's the triangle, and no, it's not gonna, so you can play with it and have fun with how to change the tropes to fit your story, but still be, yeah, I think it's a great way to get over that writer's block. Pick a trope, put yourself in the trope, get your story going, and then you can veer off a little bit later and make it your own and be creative because that's our job too.
Right. If you think about romance readers, which I do a lot for someone that doesn't write or read romance, like, but I think about romance readers a lot because they are a very, I think there's a lot to be learned from their habits. And if you just look at romance readers, like romance is full of trope, right? I mean, it's very, if you, in fact, like everything from the cover to the title to the marketing of a romance book is just dripping with that trope, right? Um, Readers get into those books, and I think to a large extent it's true in fantasy, it's true in mystery, it's true in science fiction, it's true in all the genres. They get into those books because they like the tropes.
Mm-hmm.
It's they like the unexpected inheritance story. Like people like that
I like
opening.
those
Like,
too.
oh,
Yeah.
right. Your challenge as an author is to like you're inviting them in because they know the story, and then your challenge is to give them that reader a fresh take on that story so that then they communicate that to other readers and say, wow, if you like this book, you'll love this book. um, I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think there's a lot of writers resist, and I think they especially start out their story trying to avoid that trope, and they find I think a lot of people find themselves like in act one or act two, like just kind of pulling their hair out because they resisted the actual current of the story that they're writing.
So here's a question
And that
for
can
you.
be sure.
If you're facing writer's block and you think, all right, I'm just gonna write an enemies to lovers story. Very big
Mm,
trope in the romance. So,
huge,
all right,
huge.
I'm gonna start writing this enemies to lovers story. And you kind of like, so do you outline your book to that trope? Or do you just start sort of, because I think that I would get stuck because I'm a plotter. I think I would get stuck even before I started writing, even though I decided, all right, it's going to be this trope, I'm going to outline it. And then while I'm outlining it, I'm like thinking about how do I make this different? So even though I have gotten past the writer's block of getting started, because now I know what trope to use and I can put my book in my storyline in there. How do I prevent myself from getting stuck before I start, when I'm trying to make it different as I'm starting? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to say two things. One, I'm the wrong person to ask about what to do with writer's block because I don't get it. Um, I just don't. That's a humble brag. I'm willing to, if people rolling their eyes are there in podcast land, like please roll your eyes. It's a bit annoying. Um, and I think I avoid it because like I am a plotter and I'm always thinking in these tropes. And I also wanted to say that if you go to Amazon right now, Val, and you look up friends to lovers in the search bar in Kindle, you're going to find here's just the top 5. There's an enemies to lovers hockey romance, an enemies to lovers arranged marriage romance, enemies to lovers dark mafia romance, enemies to lovers um, billionaire romance. That's just the top like above the fold on Amazon. So you can see that trope, and these books are highly regarded, and boy, some of these are selling enormous numbers of books. Um, that trope is familiar, right? People
Mm-hmm.
know it and people buy it. They want that trope. They just want to see what you're going to do with it. Look, I'll use a recent example. So, I'm talking about the Black Springs Saga stories that I started working on. I was very familiar that when I started in on that story, that I was playing in the sort of wrong place, wrong time trope. I mean, when you get into the main books in that series, it's an accidental time travel story where a person has to go back in time and figure out not only what happened to the place they landed, but why they're there.
Mm-hmm.
Is that not the most familiar time travel trope you've ever heard?
Mm-hmm.
So I knew what I like consciously. I knew what I was walking in with. Um, I maybe tried to look at it like the New Kid in Town story. I tried to maybe look at it as something different, but I think it's important. This is where I think you're reading, you as a reader come in. Like you need to have read a lot of the books in your genre, or at least like understand how the books in your genre works, maybe from an academic standpoint, um, so that as you are, as you sit down, and I'm a I'm a I'm an outliner. I'm a reformed, pantser. When you create that outline, like those beats become very familiar, right? That wrong place, wrong time person has to discover, well, they have to start in the right place and then end up in the wrong place. They have to recognize the wrong place. They have to try to right the wrong immediately. There's these beats that just happen that are natural. Now, at each one of those beats, as I'm outlining it and I'm thinking about where it goes, it's how do I signal to the reader that here's the beat that you are about to get into. This is when,
And
the
by
main
B, you're
character in
talking
this.
about the obligatory scenes for that trope or genre. Is that what you're?
Right. So in this book, so the main character in my series, his name is Cyrus Grieve, and he arrives, gets on a train in 1964 and he gets off in 1941. And he's in a place it's got a different name. And that, what happens when Marty McFly like gets out of the car
Mm-hmm.
in Back to the Future? He looks around, he tries to make sense of it, and all this, obviously, because you're in that new world, all those signals, tell you you're in the wrong world. But you have to have that stumbling around moment. So
Mm-hmm.
I recognize that, like, okay, when Cyrus gets off that train, I mean,
He's got to
just
have
by
some feelings
natural,
like, what is
right? He's
going
got to have some
on?
feelings,
This is, wait a minute. This is yeah, you get
right?
all those emotions coming through.
Right. So what I tried to do with it, and I hope all of you, go out and buy the book and read it and enjoy it, is like, how do I make this unique, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do I make the reveal that he's in a different place unique? And so I tried to add a few things. I tried to add a harbinger character in that moment. I tried to add a little bit of comic relief in that moment. That's a very, that's a Back to the Future, homage, because there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of funny when Marty is trying to figure out where he is. So
Mm-hmm.
those like, like, the tools that you have, and if you understand the trope, you're not um like you understand you can't use them all. You just have to decide which ones you're going to use. You know, there's a moment in that story where the character decides, like, okay, if I'm here, I've got to do something about it. What am I supposed to do? And then that's kind of, that's another moment I recognize, okay, Cyrus is now having to figure out what to do in this moment or with this change. Um, and then you go, like, you just keep, as you build your outline, you recognize the moment. And I think where people get stuck is like, either in the beginning, one of the stuck points is, I'm going to deny the fact that I'm writing this wrong place, wrong time story. And then, um, I'm gonna fight against those moments, and readers are gonna find that.
And
Um,
and that's where
and the other,
the conflict comes in too, and the tension for the reader and for the
yeah,
character.
yeah, yeah.
Another book
I
I
think
want to
that,
plug though
yeah.
for supporting what you're saying is The Anatomy of a Bestseller by Sasha Black. That is
Oh,
a
I don't know this.
fantastic book. Oh, it's fantastic. When it first came out, I was an ARC reader. It was really, really great. And what I loved about it was teaching you how to have that X-ray vision. You know, like when you
Right,
are reading a book that you're like, wow, this is amazing, and I wish I could write like this, it shows you how to question what's happening on the page so that you can
right,
recreate that kind of writing style in your own book. So you've got your tropes, you know how to deconstruct a book that you love and reconstruct it yourself on your pages with your story. And and I think that between, using those tools, using the tropes and figuring out, like you said earlier, like looking at it kind of academically, like how is this working? How can let me take this sentence that I love so much and figure out why I love it so much. Oh, it's because they use blah 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 whatever. And then you can ask yourself those questions with your own manuscript. Well, how can I make my work do that too? And then you do it. So it's kind of like a checklist, on
right,
how to make your writing work.
right. And I think, yeah, I think that's wise. I think you have to look at the things. And I think just, internalizing internalizing that, I don't want to say critique, because like critique then like to me always puts the like a value, like you're evaluating it, and like and I guess that's maybe not the wrong term, but like try not to be critical of what you're seeing and just try to be in the place of understanding. Um,
In your own
and
work.
I also, well, just in work in general, you're
Okay.
reading a book, you're watching a movie, you're listening to someone else talk about a book or a movie, and try to understand, what worked and what doesn't, what didn't work in that scene, in that moment, in that book, in that person's point of view. My wife is not a writer. She watches movies, she watches, television, and she's got this, like, I can always hear her talking about something, and I love it because she'll say things like, it's this kind of movie, and it tried to do this, and this is what worked and this is what didn't, because and maybe it's just been watching movies with me for 20 years that she knows that that's what I'm listening for. But you don't even have to watch the thing. You have to just hear people say like what they liked and what they didn't, and so you can kind of understand how the trope works. She was last night, she was talking about some post-apocalyptic movie she watched, and like what worked and what didn't in it and didn't work in it. And my writer brain took that and said, okay, in post-apocalyptic stories, clearly the creators were playing on this trope and that trope, and and that's just it helps build this well of stuff for when you get in there and you try to um make those things work and work, and change them in slightly, like you want to do as an author. you
Hmm.
you have like a lot to use. You have a lot to work with in your head, because if you don't know the tropes and you can't use them, you're just, you're going to be a little blind. So
So what are some of your favorite tropes? You write in the mystery genre, but I guess you can go outside of that too.
I love time travel stories are I am 48 years old. Anybody who thinks I sound younger, thank you. Anybody who thinks I sound older, thank you. But I'm 48. I've always loved time travel stories, right? I love them. I'm surprised it took me this point in my life to try to write one. So I love that wrong place, wrong time. I love that, like, I woke up in the wrong place and what do I do about it? Just love it. I can't get enough of it because it's so familiar as a human being, right? Like there are days you wake up and you feel like you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, and you got to figure it out. What about you?
I think I heard someone in the writing community talk years ago about an id list. Have you heard of this?
No, I've never heard it.
I haven't done my own research on it, but I think what it is as an author and a reader, writing down all of those things about books that you, or stories in general, that you
Mhm.
gravitate towards, like you were like the inheritance, or moving to a new place, and um let's see, moving to a new place and making it your own, or finding
Right.
family. So found family, I read a lot of found family
Mm,
books.
that's a good one.
And so writing down all of the things that you like about stories, rich setting, world building that's exquisite, or like found family, or the unexpected inheritance, or yeah, so coming up with all of the things that you love about stories, and also do that as a reader, like what you like to read, and then also as a writer, you're going to start seeing like, oh, well, all my stories have to do with courage, actually,
Right.
and
Interesting.
how to be an ordinary person in extraordinary circumstances, and
Right.
how to find like magic in the mundane, and how to make the best with what you've got and be joyful at it, not like settling, but like have that transformation stories. I am
Right.
gravitate towards. So yeah, that might be a good tip too. If you're trying to figure out like what tropes you should even start with the id list. Write down all the things that you like to read about, and you find yourself reading over and over again. And
That's wise. I like
maybe
that.
that's your ticket in.
I think it's important to point out before we get toward the end here is that there's a trope and genre are different, right? Tropes exist in all stories. I was just thinking in the mentor trope, right?
Mm-hmm.
The tropey character of Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars, the mentor. But that's also Mr. Miyagi in Karate Kid. He's also a mentor.
Mm-hmm.
So one of those is sort of like action comedy martial arts, and the other one is space opera, fantasy, sci-fi.
Except for the
The characters,
mentor is the archetype, though. That's not necessarily the trope.
oh, it's a tropish character. Like it's a tropish like story, right? The character who's being led by the mentor,
Okay, I see.
through their,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Um, the genre is those are very different genres, but they are very much in,
You're
the
right.
same, very
Yeah,
similar
I just wrote
characters.
down in the notes, understand the tropes in your genre, but I guess that's kind of a misnomer, isn't it then? Because there
Well,
aren't tropes in your genre necessarily. I mean, you read
I
through a
think
couple of
there,
tropes for romance, and but you can also have those same tropes like enemies to lovers, or whatever, but in different genres. You can have an enemies to lovers subplot in a fantasy novel.
you could, but if you look at like, okay, that's now we're kind of getting into like getting more granular. The idea then is that like the romance genre, enemies to lovers is like top trope. It's like I'm sure there's others, but like, enemies to
The love
lovers, love
triangle you were
triangles,
talking about, or yeah.
predominant tropes, right? Those might be less um prominent in something like fantasy, less prominent in something like mystery. Um it might be like, but stories also inhabit multiple tropes, right? So love triangle also exists in um Back to the Future in a sense, right? Because Lorraine is in love with Marty, and he's trying to get her to fall in love with his future father. So there's elements of a love triangle in it, but it's just not the main trope.
Yeah.
So you also have to be aware that you need more than one sort of familiar plot element to keep people reading. So, but remember that yeah, like to your point that you made, like every genre has prominent plots, like The Mentor, The Chosen One. Those are like the staple of fantasy and science fiction. If you removed those from the shelves, you'd have five and a half books because they're so
And
prominent.
and a fun little I like to think about So if the chosen one is a prominent fantasy trope, what happens if you take that prominent fantasy trope of the chosen one and put it in contemporary romance, or put it in mainstream fiction, or put it in, you know what I mean? Like if you stick it in a different genre, what happens? How can you make that twist? How can you twist that? And maybe
Ooh.
I think that's fun.
Yeah, you may have a comedy.
Right?
You may have that's where so then I mean we could go on for another hour about this, but like that's where you start to subvert expectations around the tropes, right?
Hmm.
You think about books like Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman, like you pick that book up and it's sort of comedic. It's sort of, Terry Pratchett's classic for like, humorous fantasy. Like he edged that trope, he edged that genre into accepting comedy. I mean, that's kind of a thing too to say like the tropes change over time. Elements are introduced to the tropes over time and then um they become more prominent. I mean, if you look at especially something like horror, like if you were looking at horror in the 50s and 60s, it was all monsters, right? Arrive, monsters arrive in an unknowing community and people have to solve it. Like you didn't have the more complicated psychological connections, the love triangles that exist in horror in bizarre psychological ways. So like that's when you start introducing those other things is when you start to like twist the genres, play with things, you know, make a
So
name for
don't
yourself.
think of tropes as cheating. Don't think of tropes as too much of a blueprint or, stifling in any way, because you totally can mix and match, and it just unlocks creativity. Because if you start with the trope and get your book started, then you can do that subversive twisting around and making it your own. You definitely can add your
Right.
own voice to it.
You can. You absolutely can. That's your job, actually.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, cool. I think that getting stuck at the beginning is a common struggle that all writers have, whether they're seasoned or not, really.
right.
Even if you've
Right.
got 25 books under your belt, there's still, how do I start the next book? I'll never have another idea. Oh, what about this? Oh, but oh, and yeah, you can just see the wheels turning, and even if you have a struggle getting a book idea started, using tropes, for example, as a tool can help you get unstuck at that beginning mark.
Right. Right. And yeah, it unlocks just like some boundaries. I think that once you know what's in, like I think for me, once I know kind of like I know the lanes, I know the road, I know the path, like I can kind of make the drive my own, but it's hard
Mhm.
to, um, yeah, it can be hard if in the beginning, if you're just like, I like, I like this character, I like this setting, I like this idea. Um, you need a little more than that. So,
I like that. Make the drive your own.
yep,
That can be another t-shirt.
we're we're gonna have a line of clothing before too long.
Merch.
Might not be the worst idea. Merge.
All right, Eric, make the drive your own. I'll see you next week.
Absolutely. See you next week.
All
Bye
right,
bye.
bye for now.